Before my grandfather died, I convinced him to tell me a bunch of different stories about his time as an American soldier in Vietnam. Quite a few of them are paranormal and out of the ordinary, so I thought that I should share them with X. First, a little bit of context. Be my grandfather. Get drafted and sent to Nam. Become an infantryman with the rank of private. On top of this, my grandfather is really short, like 5'4" short, so he gets assigned to become a tunnel rat. His job is to disarm explosives and booby traps above ground and then fight through and destroy Viet Cong tunnels below ground. Well, fuck, may as well shoot me right now, huh? Another guy in his platoon, who is half Hispanic, is also short, and while not as short as him, is still on the shorter side. His name is Daniel, and he is assigned to become a tunnel rat alongside my grandfather. Together, they go on amazing subterranean adventures. Some of the shit they saw was, according to my grandfather, horrifying and mind-boggling. Story number 1. They were sent to clear out and destroy the tunnels. They were equipped with a shitty flashlight, a bayonet, some explosives, and an old revolver because the M1911 was apparently shitty for clearing out tunnels. It was a basic mission, and they've done this a couple times before by now. However, these tunnels are pretty small, even for a rat tunnel. They're not finding any traps or Viet Cong, and the tunnels almost seem abandoned. Whatever. They stay on guard for booby traps or any armed VC lurking behind corners. They come to a larger section in the tunnels. They can finally stop crawling and go into a crouching, half-standing position. They can hear water running through the tunnel and begin to think that they are either above a river or that the tunnel leads further on into a watery cavern. Daniel then shines his flashlight over to the other side of the room, and there they see about 4 completely massive spiders. My grandfather says that they were longer than a foot, and each had a leg span of about 2 or 2.5 feet. 3 of them were bunched up in a cluster next to each other, and one was resting about 3 feet away from this cluster. My grandfather hates spiders, and he sits there paralyzed. Both of them sit there quietly, just staring at the spiders. This goes on for about 2 minutes. My grandfather then takes his eyes off of the cluster and looks towards the other one, which was resting by itself, and he realizes it's not there. My grandfather looks around and sees the spider on his left, slowly but steadily advancing towards them. He screams and fires at the spider. It doesn't even seem to slow it down. He hauls ass back up the tunnel, with Daniel following close behind him. Daniel throws a grenade into the chamber as they are climbing back up through the tunnels. They make it out, screaming and yelling about spiders. Luckily, nothing follows them out, either from having died from the grenade or from having stopped pursuing them. My grandfather told me after the story that he is pretty sure that it wasn't even a Viet Cong tunnel that they climbed into, but a tunnel that the spiders themselves had made. Story number 2. Once again, they're crawling underground to destroy a Viet Cong tunnel. They're crouch walking through the tunnels, and they find a not-so-hidden booby trap. It's one of those booby traps that would release a bunch of scorpions or snakes upon tripping it. My grandfather and Daniel stop to consider their options. They figure that they might be able to disarm the trap. I mean, how hard could it be? Pretty hard, apparently. This one was very complex for some reason, and they were not sure how to disarm the trap without releasing the poisonous death animals inside. They decide to just blow the fucker up and hope that the tunnel doesn't collapse. America.png. They back up a good bit and then lob a grenade over in the general direction. They wait, and it explodes. The trap is gone, and they continue forward. As they get to where the former trap was, they notice another tunnel exposed by the grenade. Out of the new tunnel comes a 5-foot-long centipede, which barrels right past them and down deep into the tunnels. Fuck this.jpg. Not wanting another incident like with the spiders, they plant their charges and haul ass out of the tunnel. They make it out of the tunnels, shaken but no worse for wear. Pic related is the first thing that Google gave me when I typed in Vietnam centipede. Story number 3. This one doesn't involve my grandfather directly, but it's about some of the stories that he heard from the other guys while over there. At the beginning of the war, my grandfather was talking to a bunch of guys from a different company. They tell him about how they saw a bunch of wild apes in the jungles. He calls bullshit and says there are no apes in Vietnam. As the war goes on, more and more guys claim to have seen these apes. They called them rock apes, as they would throw rocks at these soldiers they would encounter. Apparently, they were coated in red hair and were normally about 5 feet tall. My grandfather still isn't convinced. He thinks that they are either making shit up or are mistaken. One day, a bunch of guys get very defensive, and they tell my granddad that they had been awoken in the middle of the night by screams and hollers while being pelted by rocks. When they went out to investigate, they were ambushed by these things. Apparently, the apes were extremely strong and had managed to kill 2 different soldiers. But they still managed to fend them off. My grandfather still doesn't really believe the guy, which was odd because he saw a lot of weird shit too. My granddad says that he also would hear stories about giant snakes in the jungle. Pic related is a drawing of an alleged rock ape. Story number 4. At about halfway through the war, they get orders to clear out some tunnels. They start crawling through and begin to faintly hear voices. It was either VCs or running water. They keep working their way through the tunnels, and these voices get louder and louder. They realize that they're probably really close to a room full of Viet Cong. They decide that they are going to ambush them and then after blow up the tunnels. They pull out their revolvers and rush further down into the caves. They fall into a spacious room, and all around them are large white eyes. Fuck, they think. That's a lot of Viet Cong. My granddad raises his flashlight and he notices that these are not VCs. According to my grandfather, what they were looking at were about 3 to 4 feet tall, lanky, white, and had big eyes and ears. They were each wearing a bunch of different clothing, with some obviously looted from corpses. Others were basically just wearing rags. They make a hissing sound at him and Daniel and begin running deeper into the tunnels. My grandfather and Daniel are kind of awestruck and don't know what to do. Daniel keeps going on and on about Latin American folklore involving gnomes. They eventually just climb out and report the tunnels as having been abandoned. Pic related. It's apparently a Latin American gnome called a duende. Story number 5. This one doesn't involve tunnels. It was a day off and my grandfather and others are resting. A few of the other soldiers go down to a nearby river to cool off. About 30 minutes later, one soldier comes back screaming about how something in the river had attacked one of them. They all grab their rifles and a first aid kit and run down to the river. 3 soldiers are on the bank of the river and one is bleeding profusely. The other 2 are administering basic first aid. My grandfather says that something had torn off his left leg completely. They look in the river, which is now red from blood, and they see a giant, serpent, eel-like creature swimming around. It was yellowish and had long fins on its side. They said it looked like a massive moray eel with fins. They fired on it, and it darts further down the river. They get the guy back to camp, but he dies of blood loss along the way. Story number 6. My grandfather and Daniel are about to dive into some more tunnels. They're about to go in when they hear a deafening roar come from the tunnel. They say it sounded like a dragon. They are all stunned and look at a nearby officer, who just kind of shrugs and tells them to go in anyway. Geez, thanks, asshole. This tunnel is apparently worse than most, as it is filled with giant ants and spiders. Anyways, my grandfather continues to crawl through. The roaring gets more frequent the further they crawl down. They think, fuck this, we are not going to die today. So they plant the charges right then and there and haul ass out of the tunnel. As they are crawling back up, the tunnel starts shaking like mad. They hurry the fuck up and they get back to the surface. Everything up there is shaking too. They detonate the charges, destroying most of the tunnel, and the roaring and shaking proceed to stop. Story number 7. This is the last paranormal story I have. Even I have a hard time believing this one at times, but my grandfather was almost certainly sincere when telling it. He was crying and absolutely racked with grief. This one is also a two-parter. Near the end of the war, once again they are clearing out tunnels, and there are no creepy crawlies thus far. They are crawling through and they realize that this tunnel leads into a cave of some sort. They explore the cave for a bit, and then they are about to head back up when they realize that there is a light coming from one of the passages in the cave. It's not either of their lights, so they grasp their revolvers and walk through the passage. My grandfather says that they walked into a well-lit room filled with brightly colored plant life that they couldn't recognize. The light was coming from an orb on the ceiling of the cave, and all around them were vividly colored birds flying about. What the actual fuck is this place, they think. Him and Daniel explore a little, and among other things, he finds a spiky red fruit the size of a watermelon, and a bright yellow pool of water. My grandfather says it looked like he was in a fever dream. They head towards the back of the room, and there they find a stone altar. There is also blood stained across the stone, and there are a couple of knives and other tools lying about the altar. Their curiosity turns into dread, and they turn around to get the hell out of there. They stop, and there are 5 reptilian-looking humanoids staring at them. He says they were about 5.5 feet tall, blackish green, and scaly, and they all appeared to be wearing robes of some sort. Without hesitating, my grandfather and Daniel fire upon the creatures. One goes down, and another shrieks out in pain. The room gets extraordinarily bright, and my grandfather passes out. My grandfather then wakes up back in the main part of the cave. The passage that him and Daniel had gone down is now gone. Daniel is also lying next to him, but is barely breathing. My grandfather can only do so much for him down there, and drags Daniel out of the cave and back up through the tunnels. He gets back out and hauls up Daniel. They grab him and send him off to get medical attention. After pulling Daniel out of the cave, my grandfather remembers about what he saw. He says that his vision once again goes black and that he can't even remember the next 2 days. According to the other guys in his platoon, my grandfather was in a state of shock. He could barely speak and stuttered a lot. It was almost like he was shell-shocked or something. They send him also to go get medical attention, and 2 days later, he mostly recovers. When he goes back, he asks his platoon about Daniel. Apparently, Daniel had died shortly after being pulled out of the tunnels. My grandfather then breaks down. Apparently, the war was close to ending. He had only delved into 2 more tunnels after that experience. He legitimately hated anything subterranean after that. He despised caving, insects, lizards, and even requested to be cremated so he wouldn't be buried underground. I showed him a picture of a generic reptilian alien, pic related, and he just about had a heart attack. He said that it just needed to be a bit blacker, but besides that, it was pretty close.